What in the world is going on with Cam Rising? That's the question we're going to try and answer on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If it's your first time tuning into our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to have on today's show John Canzano at johncanzano.com, as well as statewide. You can listen to him Oregon Radio 3 to 6 p.m. John, really appreciate you coming on. You had a story on Cam Rising, and what I really enjoyed about your story on Cam wasn't just where Cam is, like what was kind of happening with Cam, but also just how different the paths were for Cam Rising and Cam Ward, because there was a time, I don't know if Cam Rising would have ever had the NFL success that it feels like Cam Ward's going to have, but there was a time where it seemed for sure that he'd at least get a chance in the NFL. And now, I mean, there was a sighting for him the other day at the Utah Royals FC game, but that's all we've heard about. So this has been a very strange situation.
Yeah, it's kind of a sad one. I mean, when you think about it, that look, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders in this draft, both former Pac-12 guys that played at Washington State and Colorado. You go back to last year's draft, it was, Caleb Williams was a USC. That's a Pac-12 guy. Jaden Daniels was at Arizona State. That's a Pac-12 guy. Michael Penix, Bo Nix. The quarterbacks that have come out of that conference have all, sort of been ushered into the league. And it was just 2023 Media Day in Las Vegas. I was interviewing Cam Ward. He was then at Washington State. And at the time, he didn't look like he was going to be a first-round NFL draft pick. And now we know, the guy, not just first round, but high. And I'm interviewing him and we're talking. We're just kind of chatting. And he sees Cam Rising from across the room. And he suddenly goes into, there's the GOAT. And Cam Rising was coming off back-to-back Pac-12 championships at Utah. He was the reigning conference MVP, player of the year. He had played so inspired in that game, against USC, where his helmet popped off, and then certainly then the subsequent injury in the Rose Bowl, and he was rehabbing. And so there were all these questions, as Utah fans know, going into that season, and it really just hung over the season entirely and kind of, brought the whole season to a halt. But there were all these questions about when is he going to be back? How good is he going to be? But like Cam Rising didn't have the sort of measurables that you look for in a top first-round NFL pick. But certainly, if he stays healthy at Utah, I think this draft that we just saw, this draft becomes the Cam Rising draft where, is he a second-round pick? Is he a third-round pick? Somebody would have taken a bet on Cam Rising with all of his success, what a leader he was, and the fact that, he was just a winner and so tough. And that hit with USC where his helmet flies off, and it epitomized his toughness. So, I really looked at this 2025 draft, and I sort of wrote about how the absurdity of Cam Ward ending up as the number one pick after leaving Washington State and going to Miami. Cam Rising, totally different story. And this draft probably should have belonged to him as well. This was going to be the draft for him. And certainly his career in college just marred by injury, and the hand injury, the subsequent knee injuries, and just a lot of questions about, what happened to him? Where did he go? Why won't anybody talk about it? It's an ongoing, one of the great mysteries, I think, with Utah football.
I still remember, I think it was the week before the UCF game. So Utah's last game of the regular season. Kyle Whittingham goes, I'm going to let Cam announce his decision in the next week. And here we are. We are recording this in late April, and we have still not heard anything from Cam. Kyle Whittingham was forced to speak on it again and just say, hey, Cam's not on his roster. I'll let him announce his plans. He was not a participant in the Big 12 Media Day. There's been no post about him declaring for the draft. It's in large part probably because of the injuries, right, John? It seems like Cam has probably left football behind, and it's a tragic story for a guy who brought so much success. And I do believe we'll one day have his number up there retired by Alex Smith at Utah.
You talk about like big wins, pivotal wins in the last 4 or 5 seasons. Cam Rising had them all, and he's such a good leader, such a good player and a gamer at quarterback, and a guy that I would have liked to see go to the NFL and maybe have a shot to have a career, if not as a starter, as a backup. There was a place for him in the league. But, look, I think the questions that need to be asked at Utah right now, and I don't think Utah's done maybe answering these questions, is, what kind of medical evaluation did he get on the hand? Certainly, we all saw him get tackled on the sideline. It was an unfortunate injury. The team doctor comes out right away and says, hey, look, it's not that bad. He'll be back. But we saw him at the end of the year. He couldn't move. He wasn't mobile. He couldn't grip the ball. He couldn't throw a pass. It was just, you were watching a shadow of the guy that, had led Utah to those back-to-back championships. So he certainly wasn't healthy. I have to wonder if, his refusal to kind of talk about things is it tied to potential litigation? Is he having hard feelings? Are there questions about, was there a misdiagnosis? I think these are all things that are still in play until we hear from Cam Rising and he says, no, here's what's going on, or I'm going to come back and play another year, or I just decided that the injuries, it was too psychologically damaging. Now, look, there are a lot of us who have had knee surgeries, right? I've had 6 knee surgeries, right? I played college sports. They didn't happen when I was playing. And I can tell you, though, I've ruptured both patellar tendons. There is a psychological barrier that you have to overcome when you come back from a major knee surgery. And he had that. And then when you suffer a subsequent knee injury or a hand injury or something, it's like being, rolling down the hill and finding yourself back at the bottom of the hill again. I can't imagine a player who had played at the highest level as Cam Rising did and had the success that he did. I cannot imagine how psychologically difficult it would have been to endure what he went through. And I think, maybe that's part of why he hasn't come out and talked, but Utah, I don't think, nobody at Utah is really talking. Kyle Whittingham saying, I'm going to let Cam speak for himself. I do wonder, given that no one is talking, if there is a potential there for some litigation around the injuries. I have to wonder that. And until somebody says otherwise, I think that's a question that needs to be answered.
John, you do a great job covering the game of college football. Like, can you remember another situation like this where a quarterback gets these injuries and then just goes silent? Like, we haven't heard anything. It feels so strange.
Yeah, it's unusual because you usually get, a medical evaluation, or you get the school talking about the injury, and that just hasn't happened at Utah for one reason or another. Maybe they're out of respect for Cam Rising. They want him to talk about, the injuries, but I think at some point he's got to come out and he's got to talk. I would love to talk to him. I obviously did the work I did in reporting what I could report regarding, where he is. He did, people have seen him places, he shows up at, a soccer match, or he shows up on campus, or he's riding a scooter around campus. And so, maybe there's just part of him that wants to, be a college kid. And I don't think the criticism that he got, I know fans got real impatient with him at the end, really wanted to see him on the field. And I saw a lot of chatter on social media that I thought was unfair. But in the end, I think you have to look back at his tenure and his career at Utah, and you have to say that the highs were there. That, I was there that night where he leads Utah to that comeback win against USC, where he scores the game winner and the 2-point conversion. And it was just a magical night. I was there when he beats, Oregon, and I'm there when he beats USC for the Pac-12 championship. And he was a competitor as a player, and obviously a fierce competitor and a great quarterback. And I really do think that this draft, in some weird way, in some weird measure, should have belonged to Cam Rising along with Cam Ward.
He was a winner. Like you mentioned, every time counted out, just came through. And there's a valuable skill in that. Tom Brady was never the most physically gifted quarterback, but he always had a knack for coming through. I'm not saying Cam Rising would have been Tom Brady, of course, but he could have been something, it felt like. And that's what's unfortunate.
His skill set reminded me of Jeff Garcia a little bit. And Jeff Garcia, who played at San Jose State and then had to go to Canada, had to go to CFL, became the MVP of the CFL, won a Grey Cup with the Calgary Stampeders. Cam Rising, similar size with Garcia, similar arm strength, kind of gamer that Garcia is. Garcia was a fantastic competitor. I grew up with him. I knew him as a kid. We went to the same high school. Cam Rising had that, George Plimpton wrote a book called The X Factor. And if you get a chance to read it, check it out. But he basically looked at all of these winners in sports and all of these leaders, presidents, people who are CEOs of companies. And he found that, you didn't want to play these people in horseshoes. You didn't want to play them in tic-tac-toe. Like Michael Jordan wanted to kill you, right? If he played you in a game of billiards. Cam Rising's that way. I watched on that media day where he still was recovering from the injury. He walked over. They had a pickleball court set up inside, and Caleb Williams was hitting the ball around. And Cam Rising and Caleb Williams started hitting the ball back and forth. And it got my attention because I was like, there is no way, even an injured Cam Rising who's rehabbing an injury, there's no way he's going to let Caleb Williams beat him. And it was just interesting to kind of see the competitive juices flip on in that moment as they were just volleying and lobbing the ball back and forth or hitting it back and forth on the pickleball court. But I think there would have been a place for Rising in the NFL. I think he would have had a fight like Garcia did to get into the league and get a chance. But, Jeff Garcia led the NFC in passing with the 49ers one season.
Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for skilled trades. Supply House, whether you're into plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading services, so you'll always be able to talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for the extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/DM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use that promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Once again, you can head over to supplyhouse.com/DM and use that promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order at supplyhouse.com. You can head over and check it out right now. Yeah, Cam's a guy. Counting him out was a bad business when he was healthy, and unfortunately, that's what's kept him off the field. John, I just thought about this as we're just talking out loud about this whole situation. Because like you mentioned, he didn't play last year, the injury again. He got another year of eligibility, they said. He's just not with Utah. He's not, there's no way he's going to play football in 2025. I just can't see that happening. Is there any world in this crazy world of you get eligibility, we do see Cam somehow back in college football again? It sounds crazy, but we're watching it play out where everyone gets one. Yeah.
Don't count it out. I mean, count anything out, but I've heard people say he's done. I've heard people say, hey, there's still a crack in the door. Don't count him out. I mean, I selfishly, I just love to see him come back and have his story end with a season, where he's not injured and he doesn't, he looks like he can complete a pass. It was sad to see at the end. He was just a shadow. He couldn't plant. He couldn't grip the ball. He had the glove on his hand. It just, it didn't go well at the end. And it was sad to see such a great competitor go out that way.
That Arizona State game was painful. He gets rolled. Comes back, didn't look right away, but then gets rolled up on the third play of the game. Yeah. And you're just watching him gut out and try to will this team to a victory. And it just doesn't end up working out in Utah's favor. Yeah. But we'll see what ends up happening with Cam Rising moving forward. One thing I'm very curious to see what happens moving forward is how this new look Big 12 continues to kind of take shape. John, you do a great job covering college football. I feel like Utah's worked in the Big 12, but it's still kind of just a weird fit in general. What have you made of Utah's time in the Big 12 so far?
Well, I think the season had the shadow of the injuries hanging over it. It just wasn't Utah's best punch last season. But I think the one thing we did see is that, Arizona State ends up as their conference champion in that first year. I'm not surprised that a former Pac-12 team moved over and won that thing. I'm not surprised that Oregon, former Pac-12 team, won the Big Ten. We watch these teams compete at a high level. And I think when you're in the Big 12, you don't have to worry about playing USC or Oregon or Washington on a weekly basis. You're suddenly now dealing with, can you beat Texas Tech? Can you beat Kansas State? Those are the obstacles to get over. I still like Utah. I still, I grew up saying my dad telling me, don't bet against Don Shula. You don't bet against Kyle Whittingham either. And I think that they will regroup here in this season. I think left a sour taste in their mouth. Clearly, Whit was not ready to say, okay, I'm going to ride off into the sunset on that. And I think they'll figure it out. I think in that Big 12 conference, I think there's a number of things like Colorado, I think, is positioned to have a better trajectory than it would have had it stayed in the Pac-12. Arizona State clearly better off where it is. I think that Kenny Dillingham would have no regrets about saying to you, or no hesitation about saying to you, hey, we can compete in here, and we should be at the top of this conference in most years, and Utah should be there as well. I expect Utah to compete for a conference championship for the foreseeable future in the Big 12. I think they have a real shot to get to the playoff in that conference. I think they've got resources. You've got a fan base with a season ticket wait list. You got an AD at Utah and Mark Harlan who knows what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And they've already set up the contingency plan. They don't have to worry about what happens after Kyle Whittingham. They know what happens after Kyle Whittingham, and other teams can't use that to recruit against them. Now, do they need to start guarding players against poaching? Yes. This is an ongoing problem. Anybody who thinks that coaches are not out there trying to make contact, or agents are not trying to make contact, is naive. It's happening everywhere. There's a lot of hope out there that the enforcement arm of the newly constructed agency that the Power Five has put out there to say, hey, we're going to have you sort of, regulate NIL in the portal and revenue sharing. There's real hope that agency is going to have some teeth to it, and that they're, it's not just going to be tracking what's going on, but they're going to go after and penalize schools that are tampering, and penalize schools that are, not having legitimate NIL deals be awarded to kids. You're not supposed to have, a great player get paid to turn the sprinklers on and you got an automatic sprinkler system at your school. Like, you can't do that. And so the hope from a lot of the ADs nationally that I talk with, particularly in the Big 12, is that they want enforcement, because they know they can't compete against the Big 10 and the SEC if it just comes down to, hey, who can pay more and who's got the biggest donor base.
Yeah, the enforcement thing is big. I mean, what's crazy, John, is we're even seeing it in the Big 12.
Yeah.
BYU just last week, several Utah insiders brought up that they were hearing BYU trying to poach Utah individuals. And we're not just talking about like, oh, this star running back. It's like, oh, they want this defensive tackle. They want this offensive lineman. Like, it's crazy that this is happening to teams in their own conference. And we know Texas Tech has a ton of resources as well. So it's funny to watch even like teams in the same conference. Utah and BYU have always been pitted against each other, but now they're not just recruiting the same players that don't have a team yet. They're taking guys off. Well, right now it's just BYU to Utah taking guys off their roster, but it's just crazy what's happening.
Well, I saw the Holy War. Okay, I was there. I was at Rice-Eccles Stadium, and I went curious to see, like, what is this rivalry about? How fierce is it? And I got a heck of a show at the end of that game with all of the controversy with the officiating, and then the fallout in the 72 hours after that game on social media with the fans going after each other. You have a true rivalry here. I mean, we know that because these fan bases do not like each other. They are willing to call each other out. They are pointing a lot of fingers. But I got to tell you, like, the tampering thing is going on everywhere. Everybody's tampering with everybody. There are agents and players and people who are neutral parties who are getting in touch with players who are not in the portal and trying to get them to transfer. Trent Bray, the Oregon State coach, was really upset about 6 months ago as I talked to him about it. I said, is tampering going on? He's like, yes, absolutely. And until someone stops it, until someone steps in and actually punishes a school for tampering, it's going to continue.
You mentioned that there's some hope with this new agency. I actually love if you could shed a little more light on that, because I look at this situation. I don't know, John. I'm usually a pretty hopeful person. You've met me before. I like to be positive. I feel a little hopeless with some of the things that are going on.
Yeah. And I talked to Gonzaga's athletic director, Chris Standiford, and he is taking, he's very curious about what's going to happen with enforcement, because Gonzaga can't outspend teams in the Big 10 and the SEC. And yet it's this basketball powerhouse that we have seen, compete for Final Fours, compete for national championships. And so they're really hopeful that there will be strict enforcement, that, the cap is the cap, and that NIL deals that, are given to athletes are legitimate NIL deals, that this isn't just a bag of money being handed off. And so I thought it was really interesting, with the House settlement, there is, an outside agency that has been formed. There's an LLC that's been registered by the Power Five, and the Pac-12 is included in that because it was a named defendant. So it's the Power Five that has this outside agency. It's, it's registered in Delaware, and they also have, contracted with a data company that is supposed to be tracking all the NIL deals and tracking all the revenue sharing that's going to go on. And then they hired a accounting firm that is supposed to, be able to help them manage and understand what is happening with NIL and what is happening with revenue sharing. That's all great. And those are all helpful things. And they will all provide a picture for this entity of what is going on. But it needs to have true investigative authority so it can go in and ask hard questions. And it needs to be consistent. And the penalties for violating these rules have got to be severe. And it can't be like the NCAA back in the day going after SMU and giving it the death penalty. Well, it lets all these SEC and Big Ten schools that were breaking rules kind of skirt along. Jerry Tarkanian, I covered Tark years ago, and he said, the NC2A, so mad at Kentucky, it's going to give Cleveland State probation. That's kind of what happened with the NCAA. It never really went after the offenders. We saw it with academic fraud at North Carolina. So I think we all should be paying attention to this agency that has been set up. It's an LLC at this point. It looks like it's the enforcement arm of the House settlement, but will it have true authority to investigate? And then will it have teeth at the end? Because if it doesn't have teeth and you got an SEC or Big Ten school that's going, and we're going to skirt the rules here, or Miami or somebody who's, or the BYU Utah allegations prove to be true and there's tampering, you have to have the ability for somebody to come in and act as an enforcer. And if you don't have that threat, it's the Wild West.
It's the Wild West. And, in the Wild West, too, you see things like, players stealing, robbing, false promises. Well, there's false promises in NIL deals. Like, that's also part of this, too. These guys get lured and brought into places, and then those NIL deals don't come to fruition. I'm not even shading BYU there because there's been stories on that. This is, once again, everywhere. I know there's been several BYU fans that feel fired up like we're just directing it at them. Like, it's like, no. This is something that's happening everywhere. And you mentioned the Big Ten and the SEC kind of throwing their weight around a little bit and them getting away with everything. John, there was really something that concerned me that was in an ESPN report last week. And I think this would be terrible for Utah and the sport as a whole, honestly. There was something mentioned in there about future college football playoff committee, the future college football playoff appearance criteria being TV revenue. That would be so awful for the sport. And if that's what this becomes, a popularity contest, I hope we're far off from that ever being a thing, but I honestly don't know, because Utah would be in a lot of trouble if that was the case.
Yeah, I think they're trying to make it a popularity contest already. I mean, you look at what happened in realignment. The Big Ten and the SEC took the biggest brands and the biggest TV markets, and that's all it was about. That's all realignment was about. It was a no-brainer. Hey, we want LA, we want Oregon and Washington. We want Texas and Oklahoma. The biggest brands in college football got gobbled up, and so it already kind of is this popularity contest. I worry about the Power Four trying to take control of the NCAA tournament. There's nothing wrong with it. I thought this last year, with the real weakness was that we didn't have the mid-majors who were winning early round games. They weren't in there. There were only 8 at-large teams that didn't come from Power Four conferences. Like it, to me, and when you take out the Big East teams, it was only really like 3 or 4. And so what was really missing in this tournament was seeing Albany win a game or seeing a George Mason win a game. And look, we don't need to see these teams get to the Final Four, but I don't want to see the 7th place team in the SEC playing in the opening round of the tournament. I'd rather see some underdog team, mid-major team that really gives us the flavor of the tournament. But unfortunately, the tournament didn't have that. And I thought the Final Four was great. I thought, the end of the tournament was great, but in the opening couple of days of this tournament fell flat for me because the Cinderella wasn't invited. Cinderella didn't get to come. So I think you're seeing this across sports right now. I think you're seeing a lot of viewers, started turned off by what they're seeing. I don't think it's a demographic thing either. I've heard people say, hey, I think older fans are going to have a real hard time with this. I don't think so. I think it's just fans in general. I think what is going on right now is challenging our fandom. And I think it's challenging sports writers. I think it's challenging fans. And I hope somebody on the other side is advocating for the sports themselves, because if not, what I see happening is college football and college basketball are starting to look more and more and more like everything else. And what made them special and made them different We've lost that. And so if somebody's not looking out for that connection to the fan base, I think, you're just in a competitive situation where, you've got a product that has a really bad free agent system and isn't as good as the NFL or the NBA. And I think that system falls flat.
I absolutely agree with you there. And the system is crazy. It's going in a bad direction. You mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I do have concerns in the NIL era when BYU is coming in and luring Utah players away. Some who say, I'm going to stay at Utah. Then all of a sudden they leave. And then you hear hey, there's NIL tampering, all that involved. That concerns me for the future outlook of Utah athletics. You mentioned a lot of faith you have in Mark Harlan, Kyle Whittingham, the succession plan in place with Morgan Scalley, 2025. But even beyond that, why do you think Utah can stay as one of the teams in the forefront of the Big 12 and hopefully be included in whatever the future of college football looks like?
Yeah, when I look at success stories in college towns, some of the same markers, some of the common things that I see is that, the entity is the professional sports entity in the market. Boise State is the professional team in Boise, Idaho. Gonzaga is the professional team in Spokane. I think in Salt Lake City, while you've got an NBA market, you've got an NHL team, you've got the want for Major League Baseball, the University of Utah is still, to me, the brand. And when you drive into that city and you talk to people, it's what people grew up rooting for and caring about. And I think, it was a real testament. I did a study in 2017, 2018. It was pre-pandemic. I was looking at attendance in college football, and I found that attendance in the Big Ten was down for the first time ever. And the attendance in the SEC dropped the same year. Attendance in the Pac-12 dropped. It was down all over college football. There were very few places where attendance was up. And at that same time, University of Utah was expanding Rice-Eccles Stadium. And so I went to Mark Harlan and I said, help me understand this. And he's like, we have a season ticket wait list. And so there is a connection that the University of Utah has fostered with fans that is special. You've got to hold on to that, even amid an ecosystem that is under threat. And I think that will really serve well. It serves well with NIL dollars and sponsorship dollars and season tickets and all those revenue streams that are important to schools. Utah's got that advantage. There are some places that don't have that. They have apathy. They don't have a full stadium, and they're still trying to compete. I also think that the Salt Lake City TV market, it's not, LA, it's not Dallas, but it's not bad. And it's why the Big 12 was interested in Utah when all hell broke loose in the Pac-12.
And it absolutely did. It was a wild sequence of events, and now Utah hoping to have a bounce back here in the Big 12. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, just like the future of college football will be fascinating. John, can't thank you enough for making time to come on. This has been so much fun. Please let everyone know where they can find more of your work at.
Yeah, JohnCanzano.com. That's where you can find me. I appreciate having I talked to you in a press box a long time ago, and let's stay in touch.
Absolutely, 1,000%. Thank you so much, John, for coming on. That's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you guys tomorrow talking all things Utah athletics then.